Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the most critically acclaimed shonen series, known for its strong narrative, enjoyable characters, great art, and more. What's not so often discussed is the power scaling of the series, specifically battles between characters both from FMA. While obviously narrative analysis is more important than scaling, I do still think there are many interesting matches possible, with this video covering two fan favorite characters, Greed and Scar. While this may seem a bit random of a match at first, it's actually pretty fitting, with both being characters that started as antagonists that later became allies, which, little fun fact here, could possibly be inspired from Arakawa's favorite villain, Darth Vader. Both are also characters that broke free from their heritage, with Greed running off from father and the other homunculi twice, and Scar using alchemy despite it being against his culture. With that being said, I'll start going into the scaling for both characters, with this being split into two rounds. The first will be the original Greed versus Scar using the power of deconstruction, and the second will be Greed in Ling's body versus Scar using both arms, giving him access to the power of reconstruction as well. Both characters will have basic knowledge of their opponent's abilities, which, most importantly, means that Scar will know what the ultimate shield is made out of. This probably does need to be said, but if you have not seen FMA, there will be many spoilers. Now, let's get into the battle. Round 1. The original Greed versus base Scar. Since neither character has fought each other, and there's no statement comparing them, this is pretty much entirely going to be based on scaling. To start off, let's go over the speed scaling. The easiest comparison here would be comparing their fights with Ed. Ed reacts to and dodges attacks with Greed many times, with the two also matching blows. Later, Ed has a fight with Scar much closer than the original, where, similar to his fight with Greed, he reacts to and cancels out Scar's attacks, though Scar also would have pinned Ed down had Al not jumped in, and seemed to have an edge despite having to fight both, with Ed now only getting a chance after Riza shot Scar in the leg, massively hindering him. On top of this, the Ed that was keeping up with Greed was injured, so the case seems to be that Scar is slightly faster than Ed, who is equal to, if not faster, than the original Greed. In terms of strength, I think the edge would also definitely go to Scar. He's capable of parrying attacks from the likes of Alexander Armstrong and even King Bradley, as well as tanking an attack from Edward L. Rex Automail, who, as mentioned before, could match and damage Greed. Speaking of Scar's fight with King Bradley, while the latter was weakened, for reasons I'll explain later, he was likely not too far off from his normal level, which was capable of blitzing and absolutely decimating Greed. While Wrath couldn't use the ultimate eye while fighting Scar, even before using against Greed, he was still holding a blatant advantage. So, in terms of stats, Scar definitely holds the advantage, but Fullmetal Alchemist is a series where abilities are very important. Greed happens to have one of the best, with the ultimate shield giving him insane durability. Even at this point in the story, his shield could completely no-sell attacks from Izumi, who could do comparable, if not greater damage to Sloth than Alexander Armstrong, who is implied to be capable of harming Scar in their fight. On top of this, Greed also has great regeneration, implied by Al to be on a similar level to Gluttony's. For reference, Gluttony could regenerate from Scar's attacks on multiple occasions. This does give Greed a fighting chance, but Scar has abilities of his own. Of these, the most important is his ability to deconstruct things via his alchemy. Ed was capable of using this very same ability to destroy Greed's ultimate shield, and considering Scar's superior physicality to Ed, he could likely use this ability to an even greater extent. Considering Greed cannot regenerate and use his ultimate shield at the same time, it would be fairly simple for Scar to put Greed on the back foot, either using a shield that would just get negated or regenerate without being able to fight back much. Using Gluttony as a point of reference again, we see that with enough attempts, Scar destroyed Gluttony enough times for him to run out of lives, so it's clear he could eventually do the same to Greed. In conclusion, Scar would win round 1 with moderate difficulty. Now, let's get into the really interesting round, Greedling versus Scar using both arms. In terms of physicals, Scar is pretty much the exact same as before. So now, the question is if Greed has surpassed his previous level enough to match or even outclass Scar. To start off, Greedling scales massively above Ling, who is able to somewhat keep up with Bradley, and while I wouldn't say he exactly scales, he definitely at least be faster and more skilled than the first Greed. Greed eventually fights Bradley himself, albeit before he was using his ultimate eye, and keeps up in terms of both power and speed, even shattering Bradley's sword with his ultimate shield. When they fight again, he replicates this relativity, and even when Bradley is using the ultimate eye, he blocks and reacts to him. However, he's clearly a bit below, as despite having help from Fu, he was still going fairly even with Bradley, if not having a slight disadvantage. Eventually, after Wrath gets stabbed by Buccaneer, Ling takes control and fights Bradley again, shattering his sword and striking the ultimate eye before being flipped over. What's interesting to note is Ling doesn't actually have full control of Greed's abilities, such as his ultimate shield at this moment, though these attacks were done with the amount that Greed already drew out. Speaking of that, his ultimate shield gets new feats, like surviving attacks from Pride's ultimate shadow, someone around the level of Base Father and Hohenheim, albeit below. There's also feats of Greed somewhat affecting Father, even after he absorbed the gates, though I don't think they really show much, and it's most consistent to interpret it as Father's durability not being all that high, with him just focusing on regenerating or using barriers. Now is the point where we have to discuss how Scar scales to Bradley, or if he does at all. While Bradley is clearly weakened at this point, with Scar even stating he wouldn't have been able to defeat Bradley had he not been nerfed, and he did ultimately get the win while Bradley was blinded, I think there's still a few notable things. The ultimate eye being stabbed doesn't really change Wrath's speed, but rather his perception, and Bradley could still tag Greed after being stabbed, despite the two being comparable before he was damaged. Off of this, the implication I get is that Bradley being weakened wouldn't really affect his speed by much, but more so his endurance and stamina as the fight progresses. With that being said, let's go over the Scar versus Bradley fight. Scar and Bradley go very relative, reacting to and parrying each other's attacks multiple times. With his deconstruction, he shatters Wrath's sword, replicating Greed's feat. Eventually, Scar reveals his second arm, using reconstruction to create alchemy constructs that draw blood from Bradley. The two continue fighting, with Bradley slicing most of Scar's constructs, though this sets up Scar landing a kick on Bradley, and once Bradley's blinded, Scar destroys both of his arms, getting the win. Scar also gets great durability and endurance feats, surviving being stabbed by Wrath's swords numerous times. While the solar eclipse definitely came in clutch for Scar, he probably would have won anyways, just considering the edge he seemed to have near the end of the fight, and the fact that he still had enough stamina to activate a huge transmutation circle after the fight ended. I know that was a lot, so to make my point clear, Greed and Scar have fairly comparable feats against Bradley, though Bradley's definitely more fatigued and damaged while fighting Scar, albeit likely not by much, so I'll be saying Greed is slightly stronger and faster. The speed scale has consistency supporting it, with Greed dodging Pride's shadow, which was comparable in speed to Ed after he obtained his Briggs automail, and at this point, Ed was quite a bit faster than before, even being stated to be faster than Scar. Though, like with the Bradley scale, this only makes Greed marginally faster, as Scar was still capable of reacting to and could have pinned down Ed had he not flinched at the sight of Winry. The Pride shadow scaling also goes both ways, with Ed being able to react to it, despite it also being able to tag Greed, so it's likely that Pride shadow, Ed's speed, and Greed speed are basically the exact same, maybe slightly different, and they're all very slightly above Scar's. Now, let's talk about the battle scenario. Scar has the range advantage with his alchemy, which could definitely hurt Greed, though it would not be very effective against his ultimate shield. Scar could still deconstruct the shield and Greed's body, but considering Greed's advantage in physicals, Scar would likely be at a disadvantage this close up. While it would be possible for Scar to fatally wound Greed enough times for him to run out of lives, it's much more likely that Greed would get the win first, as his greater attack potency would allow him to wound Scar like Wrath's swords did, and his regeneration would let him stay at peak longer, as Scar would grow progressively fatigued. Overall, I'll give this round to Greed with high difficulty. That's pretty much all for this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. One thing I will say is that my thoughts on this topic could change, as I don't have access to the many guides there are for the series. For all I know, there could be a bunch of game-changing statements, or things to back up what I said, but without a way to find any of those, these are my current thoughts. I was really excited to talk about this series, as it's one of my all-time favorites, and I really like both characters, so thanks to everyone who voted for this topic on my community page. I'd be really interested in hearing anyone else's thoughts on this match, and if you'd like to see more FMA content, please comment below. Like always, links to a Discord server and the music used in this video will be in the description. Peace out, and thanks again for watching.